All right, a happy Wednesday. I guess it's almost evening, 5:30 here on the East Coast. Hopefully everyone is doing great out there. We're going to do an off-season video on the New Orleans Pelicans. I think we have a couple teams left. We have New Orleans, we have Washington. Who else do we have left? Charlotte, I believe, although we did a video last week with the Hornets .com site. So let's do a little bit of New Orleans, who made a trade on Tuesday. I was out for a walk when the trade happened, and I know people made fun of me because I had a hood on and I'm bald, and the angle wasn't great, but we did a 45-second clip, and New Orleans acquires the 23rd pick in the draft, which was Indiana's. And everyone's like, how do you make trades in the offseason when you're still playing? You are allowed to make trades in the offseason once you are eliminated from the playoffs. If it involves players, you are free to make any trade in the offseason if it's regarding draft compensation, no players, if you are still playing. In the case of Indiana, they're still playing, of course, and they were allowed to trade the 23rd pick in the draft, the draft rights to Mojave King, who they picked in the second round, and Indiana got back their pick in 2026. New Orleans now has the 7th pick in the draft, which is their own. Of course, we know what happened tonight at the lottery. We don't need to rehash that. And the 23rd pick in the draft. The pick they traded back to Indiana was the Pacers. It was top 4 protected in 2026. If you're thinking of it from the Pelicans standpoint, this Indiana team is going to be good again. The pick probably might be worse than 23rd, could be in the 20s, high 20s, and you're taking a little bit of a gamble. Certainly things could fall, the wheels could fall off, and that pick could be in the teens. I don't think it will be. And now New Orleans, under new leadership, Joe Dumars takes over for David Griffin, and now you go into the draft with 7 and 23. As far as the state of the roster goes, we don't need to rehash the disaster of this past season. I had New Orleans as kind of my wild card team. I said them in them in Memphis. I remember in August on TV buying stock in both, and if you bought stock in both, you probably lost a lot of money here. But I understood the DeJounte Murray trade and why you went out and acquired. That certainly turned out to be a disaster based on Murray getting hurt and Dyson Daniels turning into an all-world defender, and the draft compensation that was sent as part of that deal that did not work out for you. We had Zion on the court, off the court, injured, and we're going to go into him for a bit. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and the injuries have basically just ballooned into a 21-win team, who I think, when healthy, they're in the mix as far as one of these teams that can compete for a top 6 seed in a really good Western Conference, certainly a play-in team. And we're kind of at a little bit of a crossroads. I think we are at a crossroads as far as where this roster is. And we'll see what happens the night of the draft at 7. They're in a spot, and this is when you talk to teams and you talk to, certainly our group internally, and I think I might have said this before, they're in a spot in that 3 to 8 spot where what you get at 3 could be the same player you get at 7 or 8 here. And it's going to be interesting as far as where New Orleans goes for a team that needs rebounding, wing depth. I think from a defensive standpoint, they're going to need a facilitator. We don't know when DeJounte Murray comes back from that injury. CJ McCollum is going into his last year of his contract. There are some big decisions as far as Jeremiah Fears. For me, the guard from Oklahoma City would be Oklahoma. I said Oklahoma City. Oklahoma would be perfect for this group. You could be looking at Kaman Maluach. I keep on screwing up his name, from Duke, the big center. I know you drafted Missy last year. So there's going to be optionality for New Orleans in the draft, and certainly at 23 as far as what you do there also. As far as the roster, and David Griffin's out, Joe Dumars is in. I like Joe Dumars. Certainly was in the league office and put a championship roster together in Detroit, but that was in 2004. We're in 2025 right now. Things have certainly changed. They brought on Troy Weaver. Willie Green still stays as head coach. Troy goes in a, certainly in a, vice president scouting role here, former Pistons GM. Listen, we could do a 20-minute video, but at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to Zion. It really does. And his contract, I would say 99.9% is going to get guaranteed on July 15th. There's $8 million protected right now in it. He has 39.5 of that becomes guaranteed on July 15th. 42.1, 42.2, and then 44.8 in the last 2 years are non-guaranteed. There are metrics in the contract. We're not going to go into a whole video on this as far as becoming guaranteed based on games played. There's a body fat percentage. There's a weight clause in there. He hit the weight clauses and the body fat percentage during this past year. That's why there's roughly $8 million. It comes down to Zion. If Zion's healthy, you got a chance. If he's not healthy, and past history has shown you the likelihood is that he is not going to be healthy. When you play 30 games as he has this past year, let me find out the Zion. He has played in just 46% of the regular season games since drafted in 2019. 30 games this year. You saw when he played this year, and I was in LA and saw them play the Lakers. I think it was March, and where Zion was incredible. And you saw him a little bit playing de facto point guard, and he could play center for you. But what happens with Zion as far as where he is from a physical standpoint, I do think there gets to a point, and I'm not going to go into all the off-court things, but there is a point where you're basically like, excuse my French, you got to like shit or get off the pot as far as how you're going to build this roster around. And can you trust him as far as how you build your roster around him? And it feels like we go into every season and we're like keeping our fingers crossed that Zion can stay healthy and then New Orleans has a chance. And when he doesn't stay healthy, this team is a lottery team. And we saw the Brandon Ingram trade, and that gave him a little bit of flexibility because you don't have to re-sign Ingram. But a lot of it is on Zion. A lot of it is going to be on the health of Murray, on Herb Jones, who's coming off an injury and is on a great contract. I see everybody writing, yeah, you could trade Herb for the 8th pick in the draft. I'm like, Herb's on a great contract and he's an all NBA defender. And then you have Trey Murphy, who's going into that first year of that for I think 112, somewhere around there, extension. There's blueprints as far as some foundational pieces there. But what are you going to do with CJ McCollum, who's on an expiring here, if the goal is not to re-sign him to an extension? And I think when you bring in new leadership, you're kind of in this evaluation period with this group. And you've got a bunch of guys on, whether it be Jordan Hawkins or Jose Alvarado, these former first-round picks, and then you're going to add 2 more. You're not going to be able to keep everyone. When you keep both picks, and then you have Antonio Reeves and Elfrid Payton and Brandon Boston Jr., both those guys have team options. And then you add the 2 picks, you got 15 players on your roster. You're at the limit or the maximum for the regular season. 21 you can carry in the offseason. And where you are financially also is you're $1.8 million below the luxury tax. So basically what that means is that you're $1.8 million below luxury tax. You're 7 and change below the first apron. What that means is that you're probably not bringing back Bruce Brown, or unless you're going to move off some money here. And that's kind of who you are from a roster standpoint. Kelly Olynyk's on an expiring. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting how aggressive Joe Dumars is. And I think you learn a lot when you're away from the league for a little bit. And certainly Joe was involved in the NBA for a bit. And we've got all these different rules, and who he surrounds himself from a support staff is going to be extremely, extremely important. You saw his first big move, which was somewhat aggressive, getting another first-round pick. But I'm intrigued as far as where New Orleans goes, because the following year, which is 26, 27, McCollum comes off, Olynyk comes off, Zion's got that non-guaranteed contract. There is the flexibility as far as how to shape your roster. But one or two bad moves in the Western Conference, and you're going to be back in the bottom of the standings trying to get out, and it's going to take you a long time here. When you look at top front office priority, we went over the finances, certainly Zion, but extension candidates to watch is CJ. Hard to see me on an extension. Herb Jones is also extension eligible, which would be interesting. Team needs, health, of course, identity on defense. Lowest defensive rebounding percentage this season, gave up the second most points in the paint. That is certainly important. Your draft equity, you've got all your own first. We talked about the pick that went back to Indiana from the recent trade here. You have you will send the least favorable of your own or Milwaukee to Atlanta in 2027. It's top 5 protected. Pelicans have the right to swaps with Milwaukee in 26. It's unbelievable. Well, that's in the Drew Holiday trade, but it worked out certainly for the Bucks. And you got 4 seconds available to go out. So you're good draft equity standpoint. I think you're probably in the top 11, 12 from that standpoint, but it all comes down to Zion. And I know it's kind of like we're beating a horse on this, as far as it sounds like a broken record every year here. And I'm interested if this roster stays healthy, what is the upside of this roster? And what is the impact of the 7th pick in the draft have to a healthy roster? And what are your optionality if you want to move around a little bit more in the draft here? New Orleans is intriguing for me in a lot of different reasons. And it starts next week with the night of the draft. Hopefully everyone is great. We will do the remaining videos soon. Take care. I'm on fire. It's NBA on the